to this session. So for those that have joined us, you are welcome to just sign into the chat with your PS number. Please remember to do so. Prof. Willie, please remember as presenter also to sign in and out of the session as well. So let's just give it a few seconds and just see how many other delegates will still be joining us. In a few seconds. Right, everyone, welcome to this session of Prof. Willie Chinyamurindi, called the Testing a Decent Work Satisfaction Turnover Intention Model in the South African Public Service, the Role of Job Embeddedness and Engagement. Prof. Willie, thank you so much for presenting this research that you did. Prof. Willie is an NRF Y2 researcher. He's also a professor within the Department of Business Management at the University of Fort Hare. He's got an extensive resume. I cannot read everything, but also a recipient of the 2020 SIOPSA Presidential Academic IOP Award winner of last year. So, Prof, thank you so much for sharing your research with us. You're welcome to share your slides.
Thank you. One second, colleagues. I'll be with you now. Okay, perfect. And then we go back here. Okay, I didn't expect this to happen. Apologies, colleagues. While I'm sorting myself out here, let's see. So a couple of years ago, I was interested greatly in the element of decent work, particularly having attended a conference where somebody was discussing the importance of promoting decent work, particularly from an industrial and organizational psychology point of view. And so this led me to some investigation, looking at trying to understand who are the main people involved in studying this element of decent work. My interest was also taken to some things that were happening, particularly within the South African context, notably within the public service, because the public service is seen to be an important vehicle through which we realize service delivery to the ordinary people. Now, the ordinary people, if you ask me, are the men and women who probably are faced to the fullest extent with what is happening with the pandemic. They are the men and women who are challenged by uncertainty around even conditions of work, uncertainty around even if they will have a job tomorrow. And we must therefore then pay attention to this mechanism called the public service. Now, in the Eastern Cape, I stay in East London, and just less than an hour away is Bisho. And Bisho is really the provincial hub of most of the government departments. And through the interactions that I've had, having to work with a lot of people, it then started this interest to actually say, how do we improve aspects of work outcomes within the public service? And of course, some of us would have experienced that turn when you go to a government department and you're standing in a queue for a long time, and you're just seeing people moving up and down, or when it's your turn to be served, somebody then says, oh, I'm taking my lunch break now. So we all have experiences of the public service, but the public service becomes this important vehicle through which we get things done. And I want to unequivocally state that this is an important context. So with all of these interests, I then started thinking about creating a model. And then this model is guided by some of the research that has been done. I did a study by looking at some of the most common themes that are researched in some of our prominent publications: the South African Journal of Industrial Psychology, South African Journal of Psychology, South African Journal of Human Resources, Acta Commercial, you name all these journals. And sometimes if you really want to know what are the most common themes we research within IOP, ask your students. So every year I get students come with topics. So what do you want to research? They will tell you about stress, satisfaction, turnover, organizational kind of factors. And it's understandable because we are located within the context of IOP. But then we neglect something, which is this element of decent work. And my interest in the next couple of years is really to try and push this agenda and invite colleagues even here to say, let's find a way of working together and working on some of these ideas. So I wanted to test a model. And in this model, I took some of the most common researched themes within the public service research: work satisfaction, job satisfaction, turnover, intention, embeddedness, job embeddedness, organizational engagement, and job engagement. But then I wanted to put in a caveat that let's focus on decent work, particularly because the decent work theme is something that is also being argued as important. And I applaud the organizers of this conference, because within the framing of all of this reality, one of the calls that we had as part of the conference was the word decent work. And we're going to see this word come out more often. And this is, for me, very interesting. And so this was the model. This was just basically based on theorizing, especially from those journals. I relied a lot on my colleagues from UNISA, who have a very, very good, strong output around some of the industrial psychology HR research. So the UNISA thesis repository was also helpful. And I was interested in understanding how well a job is organized in terms of its influence on what people would call the mobilizing forces of employee behavior, such as intention, retention. How does that influence engagement, not just organizational engagement, the wider, but particularly from a micro perspective, the employee and how engaged they are. I was also interested in then also ascertaining the influence of engagement and perhaps positioning decent work as a mediator between engagement and the two outcomes, satisfaction and turnover intention. So this was purely based on the theorizing that I've done, and I've watered it down really for the sake of this presentation so that we follow together. And so this was the set model that I wanted to test. And so the next thing also, which I must mention about the importance of the study, as I've mentioned, the challenges in the public service, an important conduit for service delivery. We must not ignore that, and I've already mentioned this. If you have to look at the protests that happen, if you have to look at service delivery protests that happen, if you have to look at the challenges of, when the Auditor General releases her report, there will always be something about challenges within the public service. So we must pay attention to this important conduit, organizational unit of analysis, if you like. We also have some support from some global imperatives, particularly the Sustainable Development Goal number 8. Interestingly, this goal states it as decent work and economic growth. So one of the things that this goal is trying to promote is the idea of decent work and economic growth, that these need to be prioritized as important and key. We then go to some developments within the field of organizational studies. And this comes through the work of Duffy and colleagues. A little story here. Last year, I attempted to apply for one of these prestigious grants And I actually wrote to Duffy and his colleagues about the scale that they've designed and sent them some ideas that I wanted to play with. And I had the privilege of them actually writing a reference to the application. We didn't get the funding, but I was so happy that they showed interest in the necessity of some of these studies advancing into our context, such as South Africa and the African continent. So we still have that blessing, and going forward, we will tap into that letter as encouragement and motivation for the work that we must do. But the second thing, which is rather sad, at least for me as an academic and as a researcher, is this noted neglect by researchers like me in paying attention to decent work. I could be corrected. In the leading journals that we have, most of them by AOSIS, the publisher, I've only seen one article on decent work published in the African Journal of Career Development. And I think the framing of that article was in Togo, particularly using the scale by Duffy. And I'm going to get to why we need to pay attention to the scale by Duffy. So this led me to a challenge, which I hope I will be knocking in some of our journals and the policy practitioner press to come up with contributions around this notion of decent work. And so we've got this scant focus on this important aspect of work, and also supported by the Sustainable Development Goal number 8. So this then makes, at least for me, the study quite significant. And so why my obsession with the scale by Duffy and colleagues? Well, it's an interesting scale. A couple of years ago, a leading journal, the Journal of Vocational Behavior, ran with a special issue around the psychology of working theory by Duffy, David Bluestein, and one of the things they were seeking to get were, different studies from different contexts around decent work. And again, notably, we had a study from Brazil, we had a study from the UK, the US, Japan, China, and some Scandinavian countries as well. But we did not have a study framed within an African context. And so that also has aroused a lot of interest, at least for me. So the framing by Duffy and colleagues, particularly from an organizational point of view, is that decent work consists of these 5 elements that you see: safe working conditions, access to healthcare, adequate compensation, free time and rest, complementary values. Now, in my work as an academic, I am finding myself more and more yearning for some of these things. I'm not sure about how adequate is adequate compensation. I think we're never satisfied, I guess. But access to healthcare becomes important because in the height of a pandemic and all of these things that are happening, safe working conditions. I don't want to just fall off my chair just because the chair, the conditions of work were not safe. Free time and rest, again, busy schedules, and we are approaching the end of our first semester, marks have to be in. So I'm yearning for free time and rest. And then complementary values, really, to say within the ideal of work, we are, and it links with the previous keynote around, are we seeing things in a similar way around, common values that we should uphold? So at the center of the studying of decent work is the psychology of working theory, which emphasizes 2 things. Number one, the individual, or the agentic power of the individual as part of work experience. And number 2, the emphasis being on well-being as part of that work experience. So the well-being aspect is really important and exciting for me because it pays attention to your traditional notions around understanding issues like stress, health. We've just completed some projects with the Medical Research Council where we're looking at mental and physical health in African workplaces, particularly in the public service. And these are also deemed to be important. Concerning the conceptual grounding, like I mentioned, the public service, the outcomes of work, particularly satisfaction and turnover, future research can develop more on that. The conditions of work, we've harped on about decent work. But also the other thing is borrowing from the idea of capabilities, dynamic capabilities, the things in terms of processes and structures that make work. And all of these are part of the mixed pot where I'm getting to. In terms of the study itself, so it was a quantitative survey, a study using a survey method, a sample of 304 respondents, just in the nick of time before the lockdown. That's when we completed collecting data on this project. So it was really convenient. And again, it was uncharted terrain where I'm really trying to understand things. And so there are also tests of moderation, mediation I can do, play around with the models and see how it does. So the results tell us interesting picture, which is not really surprising in the sense of previous research we've done in the public service. The mostly female cohort respond to our surveys. And the age group that responds mostly are the older ones, 33 and above. In terms of years of experience, we found out that a lot of the people who filled out the survey were very much experienced, with sufficient showing to their resumes. In terms of the position, mostly we're admin people and also a cohort of middle management. Now, we are talking about sending a survey to government departments in Bisho, municipalities, and we could even break it down according to that. So it was really refreshing to see the middle management cohort giving us time to fill out the survey. Most of the people were permanent, just a few were contract employees. In terms of the descriptive statistics, what the descriptive statistics tell us, which is the next paper we'd really like to write on, is really around the scale itself, the necessity of it being validated more in a South African context, not just in the public service, but other contexts, higher education and so forth. The alphas and the composite reliabilities are shown and they are summarized in the table on the screen. In terms of all of this, they exceed 0.7 and 0.5 respectively for the composite reliability and the extracted variance. So it implies really that the measurements construct considered in the research do show some sufficient ratings of reliability. I think the other big study, which is really the validation of a scale around the decent work scale. And so that was also interesting. We then looked at the convergent validity, and the table there shows us the results of this convergent validity. All the factor loadings really exceeded 0.5 at the 1% significance. And as exhibited in the table, and it implied really a good convergent validity, particularly measurement items for embeddedness, scale 1, 2, and 5, and 7, organizational engagement, scale 4, satisfaction scale 2, and scale 2, 3, 7, and 14, and 15 of the decent work scale. In terms of the structural results which we measured, job engagement, job embeddedness was found to influence engagement. Embeddedness again also influenced organizational engagement. So it influences job engagement and organizational engagement. In terms of its relationship with decent work, again, a relationship was supported there. Also supported for organizational engagement and decent work. So in essence, the picture being painted is that for us to somewhat improve the conditions of work, we must pay attention to how an individual frames their job and also the organizational engagement in totality. Not so supported for decent work influences in job satisfaction, which is quite surprising. Decent work also was found to influence turnover intention. So people could leave the workplace because if they perceived that something's wrong with their framing of decent work.
10 minutes.
Okay. So this was the model then, and that emanated from the study. And the summarized model would look something like this. And you could see where the strengths are, and you could see where the somewhat lack of support is. So what does this all mean? Well, in terms of mediation, we did find, some mediation to exist, partial mediation to exist on the relationship between the engagement and embeddedness relationship with decent work. The significance of all of this, again, we need to pay attention more to decent work, particularly its promotion, especially in contexts where I have argued in previous work to be in a state of flux, such as the public service. We need also to pay attention to constructs that we may not necessarily have been giving as much attention as we should, particularly in the South African and international IOP literature. I mean, let's move away from what we already know to even this unentered terrain. So we must also contribute towards the importance of improving not just employee but managerial capabilities, as these results then pay attention to the meting out of service. If you look at it, and in view of the theme of the conference, rehumanizing work, I would like to ask some questions based on the study as part of reflection. How are we mobilizing the forces that influence employee behaviors, such as job and organizational engagement within the workplace? Are we doing it in a humane manner? How are our conditions of work, particularly decent work, aligned with our intentionality towards promoting aspects of the jobs our people do? And how are we doing as an organization, even in periods of difficulty, in promoting conditions of work, particularly decent work? Are we compromising on certain things, prioritizing other things? Finally, against this backdrop of rehumanizing work, how are we even faring in addressing challenges such as turnover, employee satisfaction, engagement, and so forth? And is it even possible as a mandate? And these are questions I hope to be answering in the next couple of months and even a year or so as I engage more in this research. Some interesting personal significance of this work as I end. We've applied for funding, local and international funding, centered around promoting decent work, comparative studies. For instance, we have applied through the NRF for the Swiss South Africa Research Grant, and we're hoping to get positive feedback. And importantly, just today, we've submitted a concept, an intention to host a center, which we've called the Center for Decent Work and Organizational Well-Being, as to the Medical Research Council, the South African Medical Research Council, and also thinking towards a SACE in decent work and organizational well-being. We don't have as much emphasis on the organization as a unit of analysis. In the next couple of a year or so, a special issue in the South African Journal Industrial Psychology, hopefully, on decent work within an African context. So I'm hoping that all of these ideas can ignite us to thinking broadly about the importance around promoting decent work research. And I'm hoping to be sharing most of these findings in journals and policy briefs so that we also can help people in light of our theme, rehumanizing work. And I think the most important thing about this is the human aspect. Let's not negate the human aspect. And to this I say, let us forget the aliens, because we as human beings are not alone. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Prof. Willie. Very interesting talk and very, very much necessary to investigate decent work within our African context. I'm going to open up the floor for any questions. If you've got questions, you're welcome to include it in the chat. Otherwise, I'm going to see if there's any hands that's raised. Whilst we are waiting for people to have some thought process in terms of what they want to ask, when are you planning to open this center, this Decent Work Center? I'm curious about that. Can you tell us a little bit more?
The South African Medical Research Council has sent out a call saying they note the absence of African researchers, particularly as part of these extramural units. So we have answered the call to apply for the center to be housed at the University of Fort Hare. And yeah, so we're hoping also that if there are people interested in working with us, particularly in areas of decent work, it will also help the final application to also show that we've got people from other institutions, professionals who are working with us.
Great, that's wonderful work. We've got a comment in the chat from Bronwyn Ming. She says, not so much a question, but rather a comment. Research like this is imperative in South Africa. Thank you, Prof. Willie. She says, very interesting and useful in my own current studies. I also look forward to hearing about the center. So maybe, Bronwyn, you can reach out to Prof. Willie now that you're also busy with your studies. And maybe that can be a good collaboration as well. I'm still opening up the floor for any questions. I don't see any hands that's raised. Right, give it a minute or two. Great. Okay, thank you so much, Prof. It is definitely wonderful research that you are busy with and very much needed. And all the best with this model and even creating a bigger network model, a nomological model as well for this. So please remember to sign out of this session. We will be still opening or keep this session open for a few minutes. And please remember to sign out, and we will see you at the next session. Thank you very much, Prof. Willie.
Thank you.